Hi, good evening, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us at the end of it. I'm sure has been a very long day, and we're incredibly appreciative of it, appreciative of all of you who are here in person, and really appreciative of everybody who's streaming into our event via Pathable. Thank you in particular to the Global Resilience Partnership for co-hosting this event. I know it'll be an engaging and lively conversation with quite an amazing panel of people here, all seized with the urgency of adapting to the climate crisis. So my name is Alex Peterson-Zwane. I'm the CEO of the Global Innovation Fund, or GIF for short. We are a multilateral investment vehicle whose mission is to accelerate innovation to improve the lives of poor people. We make debt, equity, and grant investments, particularly aimed at improving the lives of people who live under $5 a day. I am delighted to be joined today by this distinguished group of panelists who I'll introduce in just a moment and talk together about our shared agenda around adaptation and resilience. But first, let me say a few things about GIF's journey and how we've come to this challenge of our day, adaptation and resilience in the climate crisis. Our journey began about 8 years ago when the governments of the UK and the US came together around this mission of addressing what we call the pioneer funding gap, that space in funding for innovation before commercial capital can come in, but after the time in which traditional bilateral aid agency grants are the best fit for innovators. GIF is particularly designed to act as venture capital for fragile places and for fragile things. And we've invested about $100 million so far, backing over 50 innovations for international development. What are we doing here today? Today, we've spent the past year thinking and consulting externally with our government partners, who now include not only the UK and the US, but Sweden, Australia, Canada, and South Africa, about the role that we can play and that we should play in the climate change space. And one thing we've learned is that adaptation and resilience, and particularly the contribution of the local private sector to those challenges, is under-resourced and neglected. According to the Climate Policy Initiative, there's about $500 billion a year that goes to mitigation, mostly in renewable energy, and there's some $30 billion for adaptation. And only a fraction of that is earmarked for developing countries, and a fraction of that again for innovation. The estimated need in developing countries alone is something like $365 billion a year. There's a significant financing gap here, and there's significant risk from a traditional commercial financing perspective. Resilience and adaptation are also critical to poverty reduction. Resilience is development. Development is resilience. And that's GIF's core mandate, innovation for development. And so that's why I'm very pleased to have come here today to announce, with this partnership with Nate's organization, with the Global Resilience Partnership, and with the catalytic and really timely support of FCDO, we are launching the Climate Innovation and Adaptation and Resilience Fund at GIF. We are keen to begin the process of taking our approach to investment and turning it to the greatest challenge of our day. And I urge all of you who are also coming from other donor partners to get to know us better, to learn more whether this is part of the innovation journey, an adaptation journey that you would like to be on along with both of us. So before I introduce the speakers, I'd like to turn to Dr. Nate Matthews, who is the CEO of the Global Resilience Partnership and our co-host for this evening's event. I'd like to ask you, Nate, to speak about the role of innovation in promoting climate adaptation and resilience from your own experience. So, Dr. Matthews.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for coming on what is a bit of like the graveyard shift on resilience and adaptation and loss and damage day, but it's wonderful to see you here. And thank you for the question, Alex. I'm really excited about this session and this fund. So I think when I think about innovation, it's been a bit of a personal and professional journey for me, because I started out in a previous life co-founding a small business that grew quite quickly. And at that time, I was a bit enthralled by the idea of innovation from the sort of Silicon Valley speak. You know, fail fast and take risks and this sort of thing. But that, you know, for the majority world is not really an appropriate framing. We can't go to a farmer who's living on $1 a day, or anyone else who's you know, migrating or in a refugee camp or trying to, and say fail fast, because that just doesn't work. So innovation for the majority world really needs support, and it needs adaptive learning, and it really needs that sort of support to help it grow and help it flourish. So I think that's a first point that I would say that's really key, and really moving away from the type of innovation that we see, you know, in the minority world. And it's also really important because when you encourage people to take risks, which is a key part of innovation, if that fails, then it's often, you know, young women and girls that will suffer because they'll be pulled out of school. It's often, you know, it could have catastrophic impacts if people are really living on the poverty line or in extreme poverty. So I think that's a really important framing to start with when we talk about innovation and resilience. The second thing I would say is that there is a really huge opportunity when we talk about climate finance and resilience in and innovation. And that's because when we look at resilience, we look at it across sort of three areas: as persist, adapt, and transform. And persist is absolutely avoiding collapsing in the face of shocks or stresses, which we don't want people to do, and we don't want systems like the Antarctic glaciers or the Amazon rainforest to collapse. Adapt, for me, is a little bit sort of a step to the left or a step to the right of where we're going, and that can be quite important as well. But transformation and transformative resilience is really about the novel ways of stewarding ecosystems, the novel ways of creating livelihoods. And that, for me, is where it gets really exciting. And there's huge opportunity in that space to help support innovation, and it's innovation that we need for the action that's required to support people all over the world, but especially in the majority world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nate, for those remarks. And I think it's the perfect opportunity to bring in our other distinguished speakers to offer their own perspectives on the importance of innovation in climate adaptation and, as you say, transformative resilience. So as well as Dr. Matthews, who you've just heard from, and we'll hear from a bit again, we're joined this evening by Professor Charlotte Watts, Chief Scientific Advisor and Director for Research and Evidence at the UK's Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office. Abdul Kalam Azad, the Special Envoy for Climate Vulnerable Forum Presidency, where he represents the Prime Minister of Bangladesh. Ambassador Jan Wahlberg, Ambassador for Climate Change for Finland. And Sabra Ibrahim Noordin, Special Envoy for Climate Change for the Government of Maldives. I'd like to start with you, Special Envoy Noordin, if you don't mind. And I think it's particularly important because, you know, I've just come from an earlier event where many of the small island states were talking about their unique vulnerability to climate change. And I think it's important that we hear your voice, and that you tell us a little bit about the perspective that you bring and how you can think about communities adapting to the effect of climate change, and maybe a little bit about how the Maldives might be a place where lessons might be learned that can spread to other contexts as well. It's not on. Oh.
Thank you. Yes, small island states have inherent vulnerabilities to the climate crisis, and because we live already in a 1.2 degree world, we are facing those impacts right now. We have a greater number of storms and intensity of tidal surges, soil erosion, coral bleaching. These are all things that we're having to face immediately in the Maldives. And to be honest, because most small island states are classified as middle income, we're not eligible for concessional financing. And that makes it even more difficult to access the limited resources for adaptation that are available now. and we know that the 100 billion hasn't materialized. So in terms of adaptation, what we're able to do with the limited fiscal space that we have is very immediate kind of responses to tidal surges, providing fresh water when there's been a storm, putting sandbags on the shore just to try and kind of prevent just that immediate reaction. But those are things that we can only decide on an annual basis. Those aren't things that we can plan for in advance, simply because we don't have predictable and adequate financing to address it. But we are doing things like long-term nature-based solutions, like trying to put in place marine protected areas, coral reef restoration, single-use plastic phase-out. But those, we have immediate adaptation measures that we need to put in place, and long-term adaptation. And there are limits to adaptation. We can't, the quicker we invest, the less we have to invest in loss and damage later on.
It's a good challenge that you've given us. I mean, we know we have this SDG about leave no one behind. And in some ways, this challenge is one that says that's not only measured by income, there's other unique kinds of vulnerability. And you mentioned your work on nature-based solutions, which I know there's a lot of interest in innovation in that space. Do you want to draw out any particular lessons that the Maldives has learned that may be relevant for other contexts?
Well, what we find in the Maldives is that because we're so small, it's hard to attract that kind of investment. But we can serve as a sort of a testing ground for innovation. And there are projects like coral reef restoration, 3D printing of corals, but they happen on a very small scale, and that's very dependent on the amount of financing we receive. But there are things that we want to try, and we need the technological and financial support to do it, such as how can we, because of the limited human resources capacity that we have, how can we better use technology to survey our territories, our ocean resources, and identify exactly which areas we should intervene in, and that better helps us to design our adaptation programs. Thanks.
Thanks very much. And when I come to our other Special Envoy Azad, I'll be interested in hearing whether this testing ground idea for middle-income countries resonates. But first, Charlotte, let me actually take this to you, or Professor Watts, I should say.
Charlotte, please, honestly.
As I'm sure that the UK government has done a lot of thinking itself about this unique challenge of vulnerability in tackling the climate crisis. And I'll say that we're really delighted to build on our existing partnership and expand it to this particular focus on climate resilience. How do you see this sort of quantity versus quality of funding question? And is the sticking point for innovation in resilience and adaptation one about finances? Or are there other dimensions on which you'd like to see this fund address other sort of constraints to making progress?
Brilliant, thank you. And it's a real pleasure to be here, and good evening, everybody. When you announced that we've the launch of this fund, I did have to hold myself back and not whoop, because I'm just so pleased that we're able to come in and support this partnership between the Global Innovation Fund and the Global Resilience Partnership on this really important agenda. For us, it's an area where it really builds on your collective expertise to tackle a massive issue. And I find it really hard to actually answer your question about quality and quantity. We are not facing that dilemma right now. We need huge increases in investment in innovation to support adaptation and resilience. I think the 50-50 ambition that's come out is a hugely positive sign. We are stepping forward as a government. It's great, building on the partnership that others are supporting, GIF more broadly, from our early partnership with the US that, you've expanded. We need the private sector to come on board as well. The scale of the innovation challenge, if you think about the pressures that Because of climate change, countries are facing its lives and livelihoods, its economies, its landscapes, its communities. It's impacting on economies. It's impacting on the most vulnerable most acutely. These aren't small issues, and these are ones where there are huge opportunities for innovation, but we need to start building that evidence base. And I think the kind of expertise that GIF brings and the experience that we have on adaptation resilience in combination is very powerful, because I think part of the way that we're going to bring others into this agenda is if we start to build that data and evidence base to inform investments. So we need to understand, fundamentally, what are the types of needs that we really have to lean in to support. We have to start to understand, well, what are the kind of returns in investment? And actually, what are the failures in some of the standard investments we make because of the impacts of climate change? All of our assessments, if you're thinking about this in terms of an investment perspective, is flipped on its head, because without resilience, assumptions about investment they would have a long-term payoff aren't there anymore. But also there are opportunities for different types of returns if you get the right sort of investment in new solutions and innovations. We think, and we come behind this investment as a lead, and I very much want to encourage others who are donors here to step up as well, is because GIF has a really good track record of using innovative financial instruments to drive evidence-based innovation that can meet millions. And to me, this question of scale is central to everything that we're thinking about in innovation. It's great to have small examples. We need to learn from pilots, but our ambition should be scale, given the scale of the challenge that we're facing. The other thing I think that GIF does brilliantly is a good strategies around selecting high-impact, scalable investments. So that issue of scale comes in very explicitly, and using robust measures to assess impact and returns. And the track record you've got of crowding in resource, we're coming in behind you because we really want that resource crowded in, if I'm honest. And really, as well, in particular, stepping into that pioneer gap space between where we've got a great pilot, and I'm sure there's some brilliant pilots I'm going to hear about in a minute, but actually then how do we take that to a commercial level, which ultimately is what we need to be seeking to achieve as if we are really going to create resilience and support adaptation.
Thanks very much, and for that reflection on our now long partnership, where I think we've learned a lot together. The FCDO and DFID before that were major investors in evidence and the generation of evidence, and having some patience, I think, about the timescales for that. Are there lessons you've learned from other contexts around evidence unlocking investment that you think are going to be relevant for us in this climate space?
Yeah, a few come to mind. So I think one is, let's start thinking about actually how do you try and measure and quantify what you're trying to achieve, so that when you're thinking about that return, actually you can quantify it. And I've seen that in a number of areas where we invest, is that clarity of purpose, and really holding ourselves account to actually then are we delivering. I've been quite struck at the conversations I've heard today about the breadth of the ambition on adaptation, and I am left sort of thinking about, well, actually, how do we measure that? How do we define that? How do we define success? So I think kind of getting the metrics right is important, and I think particularly if we're trying to leverage in private sector investment, those sorts of metrics are going to be really important to making the case to shareholders, to investment options. I think another clear lesson we've got from the range of innovation investments that we make is, firstly, that there isn't a one quick tech fix, right? That we need multidisciplinary partnerships. We need to have partnerships between the global north and the global south. We need partnerships between the communities that are impacted on and the kinds of stakeholders and groups that can help support innovation. So that partnership aspect is very critical. I think the other aspects is also some humility. I think we have a lot of learning from other sectors, but also a lot to learn. And so the more that we can all have humility and think about, well, what do we do well? What do we don't do well? What can we learn from others? And then how do we foster that collaborative agenda as we move forward to this significant challenge?
That's really powerful, actually. And one thing I would add on top of that is that you have to be able to accept some level of risk and the potential for sometimes things failing. And that can be very difficult when you're spending precious taxpayer resources. And so to be able to think about measuring impact at the portfolio level, rather than focusing on any individual bet that you took, I think is also an important lesson that we'll have to keep learning over and over.
We just to add quickly, I mean, we have an expression of we don't want to back single horse races. That we've really learned that we need portfolios of investment where we have teams who manage and work with partners who manage funds, and that using a portfolio lens. We do want to fail fast, but we do want a breadth of a portfolio that we have some likelihood of winners as well.
Yes. And I think it tees up very nicely to hear from you, Special Envoy Azad. And there's an interesting innovation unit within the Bangladeshi government, the Access to Information program, which is really driving a lot of citizen-centered transformation and experimentation. You also have really a sort of world-leading climate prosperity plan. So I'd love it if you could tell us about each of those two innovations, if you will, in how the Bangladeshi government does business, and how you might turn those two sort of powerful lenses onto the adaptation challenge.
Thank you very much. I will start with my friend from FCDO about defining the innovation. In innovation arena, we used to tell a jargon TCV. In public service, if time is reduced, cost is less, and with less visit, a citizen can get the service, then there is innovation. So in our country, we used to quantify with this, that how much time, cost, and visit is reduced. So this is quantifiable. And the issue of high-impacted, scalable investment. Obviously, if I spend $1, if it brings back $1, nothing doing. But it needs to bring more than $1, obviously. It may be $3, it may be $5. So what we are doing in our country, in Bangladesh, especially, I would be telling you the story of climate resilience in Bangladesh. You may know, in 1970, we had a cyclone. We called Cyclone Vola. And it cost about 100 million lives. Cyclone Amphan last year, 2020, it cost less than 100. Same magnitude of cyclone. So the story is from vulnerability to resilience. This is not only the lives. This is also the properties, wealth, loss and damage also. Keeping this in mind, Bangladesh, as the president of the Climate Vulnerable Forum, now has come up with a very ambitious project, I should tell, that is the Climate Prosperity Plan. It looks like something impossible proposition, climate prosperity plan. Yes. We are now resilient, but we need to bring prosperous from each of the challenges. So in our country, we have started with this Mujib Climate Prosperity Plan under the name of our father of the nation. So there are 6 points. In these 6 points, detail all are here. Inclusive development, leaving no one behind, value for money, so whole of the society approach, nature-based solution, local-led action. All these are incorporated here. So keeping all these, that is the bringing resilience, looking into the health sector, education, obviously issues of livelihood, social safety network, energy, 100% renewable, maybe it is too far, but for Bangladesh, keeping this, we have 6 point climate resilience to prosperity. So now we tell vulnerability to resilience and resilience to prosperity. So this may, as FCD was telling, that yes, scalable and value for money. Where is the innovation? Innovation is in all these area of the 6 point, including the A2I, which program you were telling, and also the service innovation, how best we can provide service to our citizen. So earlier we were doing specifically in the public service, but now we are with the development. And the social safety network, along with the renewable energy, may give us this prosperity for the climate prosperity plan. Not only looking towards Bangladesh, now 37 vulnerable countries, member of the Climate Vulnerable Forum, they expressed their interest to be to incorporate their prosperity plan in their country, looking into their own issues, own problems, and how to bring this problem into prosperity. So I think partnership, scope of partnership is wide here. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And the data that you gave about those 2 cyclone experiences, I mean, it really gave me the shivers, because that is also a period of time in which Bangladesh went from being one of the poorest countries in the world to now lower middle income country status, and very high growth rates in South Asian context sustained for long periods of time. So it's development and reduced vulnerability really going together. Going off script just a little bit so that it's a bit more of a conversation, I'm wondering if you would reflect on this hypothesis or this proposal that we can do more of learning from experimentation in middle-income countries that are uniquely vulnerable and bringing those lessons to less developed contexts. How does that idea resonate with you?
The Bangladesh had our independence in 9 months. The courage is sky high. It was presumed that a vulnerable country, very less income, how do we? You see, graduating from LDC in 2018 and 2021, I believe this gave us much more courage. And this is our 50th years of our independence. With all these, and the vulnerable countries, as we gathered together, at the beginning of this COP, we were 48, but within this COP, we are now 55. So this 55 country, if they can raise their voice, I strongly believe with a big partnership, sharing our experiences and knowledge, we can achieve much better. And the issue which I was telling about the value for money, we mean it. And transparency in Bangladesh, in civil service, achieved through annual performance agreement with the government officials, a robust grievance redress system. I understand that this brought much more transparency in the civil service, and also likewise in the development arena. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for sharing that. And, as you said earlier, Special Envoy Nordine, when you're using technology to understand, your own coastline better, there's many countries one can think of from Kenya to Bangladesh that might need to do that as well. And so partnership and collaboration and raising shared voices, sounds like a very promising approach for us to take. So Ambassador Wahlberg, perhaps I've saved the best for last. And, Finland itself punches above its weight in terms of innovation itself. And so I'm interested in hearing from your government's perspective, your understanding of and thinking about the role of innovation in adaptation and resilience, and perhaps building on the remarks we've just heard, how your views may have evolved during the course of this COP itself.
It's good to be here. Good evening, everybody. Finland belongs to the governments that are closely looking at GIF. We are having good discussions, and I think innovations on climate change is something that it has to be on every delegate's mind here at COP26. We are not, the last mile needs to be done before we are members, but we are working on it. It's an adaptation day, so I'll start by, you mentioned, Alex, quite well that we need to do more on adaptation. And I'm just coming from a side event of what we call Champions Group. And we are already 10 plus countries who are committed that our climate finance will be balanced. What could be 50-50, but I think it's a group that it's growing, and it's in a way trying to respond to Secretary General's call that we need more adaptation finance. The climate change is here, and it's here today. So we need to act. And what we also announced, in 5 weeks there will be a meeting of the Champions Group in Finland, and what we will start is what we call Lahti adaptation dialogues towards COP27. And I think innovation certainly would be one of the topics that I would be interested in exploring together with the LDCs and SIDS, because the Champions Group, it's all about dialogue with LDCs and SIDS and finding solutions together. And I think the adaptation agenda is very wide, and in a way, innovation cross-cuts the whole themes. I've been in panels today with the gender equality, also sexual health rights, and on Friday on disability inclusion. And I do see that kind of there are so many things that you mentioned. The GIF's idea is to have innovations for $5 a day. So we have to mainstream the ideas of innovation to our climate world. You said we are a big innovation country in Finland. I think we are still reflecting what's kind of the innovations that are particularly important for climate adaptation. So it is a work in progress, and I think alone we are quite a small country. What I do a lot is Nordic climate ambassadors. We have been having seminars, for example, Nordic green solutions in Shanghai, China, and discussing with the Chinese that what could we do together. So I think building upon that, we could also have some Nordic dialogues with LDCs and SIDS, thinking that what can climate innovation, what do they mean for any of the topics. I think our friend from Bangladesh already mentioned very interesting things. It also reminds me, I'm a GCF board member, and I think kind of the discussions we have at the board also, they do have a link with innovation, because we discuss about the coral reefs and how to do it, and we perhaps need to go and dig in a little bit deeper and bring also innovation to our board discussions.
You know, one thing in hearing you speak and just thinking about this traditional imbalance between funding for mitigation and adaptation is, you know, it's partly a short-term versus long-term payoff question, that if I build solar panels or wind turbines, you see those immediately. And in some ways, it's some of what we might need to do around adaptation and resilience is less visible and tangible. And so there may be ways we can talk and speak differently about this time scale of these questions as well. You mentioned the intersection of leaving no one behind and climate adaptation and resilience as one place where you think innovation is particularly powerful. And I wonder what you think about the challenge of the intersection or tension maybe between an innovation agenda and a localization agenda. At the same event you were at before, your colleague, Charlotte Vell-Ganendron, who works on climate at FCDO, gave out the statistic that of adaptation resources today, only 10% go to locally led solutions. And that seems to me like something for those of us working on innovation to reflect on fairly urgently. But I wonder if there's other whether that resonates with you, if you've been engaged in this for quite some time, and whether there's other areas within this larger agenda where you think innovation's a particularly acute need.
Bill, we were in the same panel, I think, and Will was also saying it's not either or with mitigation adaptation, it's both. And I think, in a way, if I look at the Finnish ideas and system, we are aiming for 50-50 in the public grant finance. And I think it's a little bit stereotype, but we normally feel that this is what we need for adaptation. Mitigation is easier to do with, we have, for example, in Finland, investment finance. We also discussing emission trading schemes. Could we, kind of the profits we get from there, could we channel that to kind of climate finance? And so we can also increase mitigation, but it doesn't have to be competing with the adaptation finance, which should be public grants. So I think it's the big challenge would be to get private finance and innovation investment funds interested in adaptation. I think it's also possible, and we need to work on that. So in a way, it's a very complex matter where we should. It's not a matter of either or. We can always build upon the other solutions.
It's a really nice segue to come back to you, Nate. You opened our session for us, and maybe you will be able to. I'll give you a bit of free rein using my chair mandate to reflect a little bit on what you've heard from this panel and how that's made you think anew or differently about where we go from here.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so I completely agree. I mean, I've certainly been very excited by the big stratospheric announcements last week around methane and forests and things like that. But today especially got me fired up, and I felt this sort of momentum build from last week of this shift, away from adaptation and resilience always being the lesser sibling to actually starting to get up there, really be prominent. So I think that's fantastic, and it's wonderful to see the donor champion group, as a part of that as well, and really leading those efforts. So that's fantastic. Just touching back on the comments on measurement. So I completely agree. I mean, resilience is about dealing with systems, and it's about bringing things together. And by their nature, systems are difficult to measure. So there needs to be more done to advance resilience and adaptation measurement. But also, I think there needs to be a bit of a shifting into thinking about how measurement is just serving donors to ensuring that it's serving people on the ground as well. And that's an important discussion that we need to take forward, because, when we talk about mitigation, it's easy, it's net zero. But, resilience and adaptation is about people. And so it can't just be about dollars spent. It can't just be about, hectares of land. It really needs to be more than that. So I would say that. And then finally, I would say that, Global Resilience Partnership, I'm very biased towards partnerships and the value they play. And I just think we're seeing a really fantastic opportunity for both the public and the private sector to step up to the plate right now. The interest level, the private sector can see the risks very acutely to their way of business, and they're really keen to engage and to support this. So that's very exciting. I also think that the support for locally led adaptation and the locally led adaptation principles is also really exciting. We've got over 70 organizations signed up to that now. We're an endorser. We're really excited about that, and that really needs to be through. And please don't quiz me on all 8 of them at the moment, but it's really about, that inclusivity, committed and sustained funding, access to funds, and really building that in from the start. So those are some quick reflections, and I'm certainly really excited.
I'll just build on that a little bit and say, one of the things that's heartening to me about the partnership, and now sort of widening the partnership by us working together, is, oftentimes, not everyone here, I assume, is international development professional, capital I, capital D. Sometimes our sector is really subject to pilotitis, and we like to create new things, and pilots never fail and never scale, and so they're wonderful if you're risk averse. But that approach will not help us solve the problem that we're all here talking about this week. And so challenging ourselves to get away from pilotitis, to focus on scale and focus on building on things that have momentum, I think is a really great opportunity for us at the intersection of climate and development. So thank you very much for that. We're going to have a few minutes for comments from partners here, but before I do that, and conscious that you might have to run off, I want to give you the opportunity for any final words for us. Yeah.
Thank you. We're actually a member of the Climate Vulnerable Forum as well. And what I said about, we have a net zero pledge too, the Maldives does, but it's negligible in the global context. And but it would actually create a lot of savings for our public budget, because quite a significant portion of that goes to fossil fuel subsidies. We import all our fuel to, for our energy needs. So doing all of this increases our resilience. And if you're looking for savings and, good investments, we have a very profitable tourism industry who do need to adapt. And they're slowly coming around to the fact that they need to support us in the net zero pledges, and also that they need to save money themselves by adapting. So I think, all innovation and sharing of knowledge is very welcome, but we need it quickly. Thank you.
That's an excellent challenge that you've given us. Very much appreciated. Let me see if there's others who are here in the audience who have reflections for us. Here, I'll be in charge of handing out the mic.
Thank you very much. My name is Olivia Lazard. I work for Carnegie Europe. And just before you run off, Special Envoy, I'm just wondering, so we're talking about innovation and funds for adaptation, but I'm interested in a different type of resource when it comes to innovation. Do you get the right type of research support and sort of creative support to imagine what adaptation for a country like the Maldives should be by 2030 and 2050, and how that could tie in indeed to what to invest into, not just as a bankable or sort of return for investments, but really also for the collective good?
To be honest, no, we don't get that, and not to put GCF on the spot at all, but we actually have to spend a lot of time collecting data, of which most of the time we don't have the resources to do that, to prove that the projects that we need adaptation financing for is actually to do with climate change. So we were asked to provide 30 years worth of shore protection data to say that this was actually due to climate change, and we didn't have that, and then the projects got delayed by over a year. So that's why we actually need more assistance in terms of technology and financial support to the local kind of adaptation projects that are ongoing, so that we can scale it up within the Maldives, but also maybe use that as in other SIDS and other vulnerable countries.
Can I, if you don't mind, just coming in on research, just to say that both GIF and the Global Resilience Partnership are going to be part of the Adaptation Research Alliance that will be launching tomorrow. So I just wanted to flag that, and it's really getting to that question that you're saying, is how do we think about doing research in different ways? How do we support research partnerships that are solutions focused, saying what is the problem, what are the partnerships, who are the constituencies that have to come together to work in an action-oriented way to generate the evidence we need critically. It's been fantastic. We've got lots of people, organizations from around the world joining. We'll be launching it tomorrow, but it's really trying to get to that issue of we urgently need this, and it can't be an abstract thing. It's got to be applied, solutions-oriented, and a real partnership. So yeah, please encourage people to come tomorrow. Sorry to take advantage of that.
Hello, good night. I'm Jesus Herrera, part of an organization that is called Water Awareness. I have been promoting innovations on the water sector since 11 years ago. And the problem was that it was not the right timing. In Latin America, the water price is so low, so to offer a return of investment to the clients, to the corporate sector, was quite hard. And some advisors told me, like, hey, Jesus, you have to wait until the water is more scarce in order that the people will start to search for solutions. solutions. So do you think that now is the moment for these solutions? Something that I was promoting 6 years ago was the water bonus market. Before I create an app to measure the water footprint of an individual, and also I developed a telemetry system to promote efficient and to anticipate to leaks.
So I'll jump in very briefly to kick it off, but as I used to work in the water world as well, but I do think that it is the right moment because the risks that we're facing are starting to pry open some of the, what I would say, the resiliency of the existing system and and starting to push some of the political economy forces that would stop transformation and innovation from happening. So I think that's sort of a silver lining of some of the really terrible, catastrophic things that we're seeing across the planet. I think that water is deeply wrapped in politics and economics, as many other places. There's a great saying about water moving uphill to money and power. And I think as we see these risks reverberate across systems, water is a big part of that, and we're starting to see openings for innovation more than in the past.
Yeah, I mean, just to add, I mean, huge interest in water across issues of how do we use it well, how do we reduce wastage. Some of the work that we're supporting is thinking about water issues across a range of sectors, agriculture, for example, others as well. So I think there's scope for a range of different types of innovation in the water sector.
So water can be always the area of a big investment. In our country, we find that 1 kilogram of rice, it needs 3,000 liters of water. So this is not wise, that we consume 3,000 liters of water for 1 kilogram of rice. So you need to innovate. In the capital cities, the people with the vulnerability in the slums, they don't get the pure drinking water for their consumption. So in our country, we have a like ATM booth. The people, they can have spend their small money and take the drinking water from there, which is very, very cost effective. Third one, let me tell about the coastal area. There you will find no water to drink unless you can have the saline water, or you would desaline it. So desalination is a very big investment area. So there we have the solar panels and having the system of evaporating the water and bringing back for drinking. Maybe in some other area, they preserve the rainwater and preserve for the rest of the whole year. So in all these areas, for water, I believe if I spent 1 shilling, that may bring back $1. So water is life. Thank you.
I'll just note the water ATM solution that you described. GIF is an equity shareholder in that. This is a good synergy between us. And I'll just building on what you said before I bring in your colleague back here. There's also really interesting intersections between nature-based solutions and sanitation solutions that also can actually reduce emissions. In Kampala, right now, something like 40% of emissions come from unsafe sanitation, which is kind of an extraordinary number if you think about it. And so moving towards more sustainable sanitation solutions can not only free up water, but it can also actually help on the margin of some of this sustainable mitigation as well. All right.
Okay. Thank you very much for the opportunity and for the discussions coming on board. Quite exciting. My name is Vincent Oeba from Kenya. I'm a research scientist working in the forest sector. As we are discussing this, I think what has come to my mind, which you may consider very important in the aspect of resilience, is to look at the anticipatory vulnerabilities that will come in the biophysical and the social systems. So as we avoid also the much focus into reactive, because the resilience will come much stronger when you also assess and see the risks that can be associated with the climate variability and the climate change. And that way now, when you come intervention, the innovation, the capacities, will be able to respond adequately and makes it much stronger. Well, for example, look in Africa, look at our land use systems. They are changing so fast. And water sources, biodiversity, means are really disappearing at a very fast rate. That means the element of those systems to provide the goods and services will be highly affected. So as we focus about this, to be really useful, we invest more in that kind of information, so as we also build resources that focuses on the anticipatory nature of the vulnerability of that socio and biophysical systems. That way, our resilience is much stronger and see much value on that case there. Thank you very much.
Do you want to take this now? So my name is Ken Caldwell. I'm here on behalf of BRAC, a Bangladeshi NGO that operates in 13 countries across Asia and Africa. It seems to us, in our experience, that there's a tension between looking for rapid scaling and locally led adaptation. And one of the reasons why locally led adaptation has been so slow to take off is because funders are very often looking for models that can scale by an organization that is controlled at national level. And if we really want to get to locally led adaptation, we've got to rethink that, in our view, in order to get to a model that enables it to be sustainable locally. And I'm interested in the panel's views about how to resolve that tension.
Thank you very much. So that's a great topic. Oops, I'm so sorry. Both of those questions are really good things for, I think, a sort of lightning final reflection around, again, this coming back to development and resilience as two sides of the same coin. And now I think you've given us this another tension, locally led and the urgency of scale as two sides of the same coin. So, quickly your final thoughts, and then I'll try to wrap us up.
On development and I would say national-based solutions, I think it will be more team for the next COP. We a little bit missed the opportunity with COP15 and COP26 this year still. The Secretary General said that the COVID was a dress rehearsal for the future, and I think we are still lagging a little bit behind in our own understanding and discourse how close biodiversity and climate change are related. So I think your point is very relevant, and I think we need to do a lot more on kind of the whole nature-based solutions and ecosystems, and I hope that will be a big theme for next year COP. It's also, like you said, we have been now on methane and forests and Glasgow innovations. Adaptation will be there, I think, stronger, and also, I think, nature-based solutions and biodiversity and the links with climate change. The locally led adaptation, and I don't know how to say this, but in a way like a small administration, for us it's sometimes easier to put the money in the big basket, and it's more demanding to do locally led adaptation. So as for me as a climate ambassador, it's a little bit of a challenge in my own system in the foreign ministry, say that we need to push this, we need to do this, and we need to do more, because it's a demanding thing. And I think the point you raised is very valid. There needs to be done a lot more, and I think it's one of the tasks of a climate ambassador.
Thank you. So I would certainly agree with your points on biodiversity and development and climate. I think nature-based solutions, we've heard a lot about them, but they often offer that really sweet spot between a mitigation benefit. So if we look at mangroves, for example, because they're fantastic. So we're getting amazing carbon sequestration, much more than terrestrial forests. But then we're also getting real livelihood benefits as well. And we're getting resilience benefits. So we're reducing storm surges, we're getting more fish in the area, so we're really getting these co-benefits. And I think nature-based solutions are, they're the way of the future, and really finding ways to finance them and combine that resilience and mitigation together, adaptation and mitigation together is a perfect way to go there. So, and then I just would say, great comment from BRAC. BRAC's a partner of GRP, and we're really pleased to be working with them. would completely agree. So that tension does exist. There is that push of big funding out the doors and a tension with communities on wanting to access money from the likes of the Green Climate Fund, from the World Bank, from the Adaptation Fund, from the GEF, etc. But I think we're finding when we're trying to build resilience on the ground, we need those local voices in the decision-making process, and that's really key for the scalability as well. So as much as we want to find solutions that are at scale right away, if we build them up from the ground and then with support from the top, we're actually finding them to be a lot more effective and a lot more sustainable.
Thanks. What more to add? Firstly, definitely agree about a lot more to do, and I think evidence to generate and think about in terms of biodiversity, nature-based solutions. It's really important and an area that needs more investment. In terms of scale, I completely recognize the challenge, and particularly as a donor with big chunks of money and issues of how we manage that. When I think about scale, though, I think there's a few elements to it, because there's the finances, but there's also thinking about what are the elements that could potentially be quite transferable. So some of our investments in innovation and resilience are, for example, drought-resilient rice species, or we're working one at the moment which will have less methane emission. Actually, that's a technology that particularly could, if you get it into food systems, it could be used in a lot of settings. If you can then do the on-the-ground work of actually, how do you introduce it in, and in a way, and in the formative work, you're thinking about, what are the needs of different communities. So I just am always slightly cautious of saying we have to do everything from the bottom up. I think it's how do you have that interface between recognizing and understanding what communities need, and then what might be some elements that are transferable, but you need to facilitate access, versus what are areas where actually it has to be the bottom up working out the solutions. The other element around scale, and I've thought about it a lot around community change, is sometimes what we're trying to scale isn't necessarily this package of an intervention, but trying to scale actually what is that process of change that we're trying to facilitate. And then the way a community does that is different. And so I also sometimes think we haven't developed our thinking about scale and what are the elements of learning we're trying to take from one setting to another in a sufficiently nuanced way. It's not just a package, it's not just a workbook, it's not just a workshop. Often it's something actually much deeper that we're trying to think about what we scale, and I'd like us to be drawing out that learning from the kind of community-based work that we support and that we do.
I will just take 1 minute. BRAC did so many innovative works in Bangladesh. I will just share one example. You see, our researchers were doing that we have very less amount of land. So we had in our field a paddy field. So on the top of it, they put some crippling vegetables. So it showed that research shows that production yield of rice did not reduce. Excellent, very good. So what the local people did, they put solar above that. So 3-storied. So on the ground paddy, over it the crippling vegetables, and top of that the solar. Last one. Some people in the southern part, so they put on the water a raft. So in the water there is fish, so the raft is there. On the raft they put some vegetables. And putting some sticks on it, so crippling vegetables, and above that solar. So innovation, endless. But this comes from necessity. Thank you very much.
That's a great story. What a great story on which to end. So, look, this has been an incredibly rich discussion at a very hard part of the day. And so first, my heartfelt thanks to all the speakers for their contribution this evening to what I think has been a fascinating contribution. Thanks to all of you for hanging out with us. And one I hope will continue well past tonight and even past COP26. Putting aside sort of prepared remarks here, I know one of the things I'm going to come away from this evening with is the story of the 2 cyclones that you told us, where development and reduced vulnerability went hand in hand. And that's the innovation agenda that we all share. And that's precisely the challenge that we are seeking to address through our Innovating for Climate Resilience Fund. Our work begins immediately, thanks to the catalytic seed funding we've received from FCDO and our partnership with the Global Resilience Partnership. So I hope over the coming months that other national development agencies join us in this work, and that in a few years' time I'm back here telling you about how we've been able to accelerate innovation in this incredibly important space. So thank you all again. Thank you all. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you. Thank you very much.